Okay, I'm gonna come up here real quick and say welcome. This is the places we play, iconic music venues and the musicians who played them. Before we get rolling, I'm just gonna do a very quick giveaway. As you all know, we are next door to Community Book Center. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go out there, we're gonna buy all the books from the festival, and then we're gonna walk next door and support another locally independent-owned bookseller. And the way that we're gonna do that is by giving away a $25 Community Book Center gift card. All right, so if you pre-registered for this session, you are automatically entered to win. That's why we ask people to register even though it's free. And the winner of this, if I butcher your name, I'm sorry, Lloyd Draw Conley? Lloyd Draw? No? All right. The good news is the randomizer will draw another one real quick. Maybe it will. One second, the randomizer seems to betray me. How about same person, randomizer really likes this. Michaela Jenkins? No? One more time, and then we'll just give it to the guy who brought us some water. Not working. There we go. Jean DuPas. Oh, look at that. Everyone's a winner at the Words of Music Festival. And now that we have a $25 gift card, I'll bring that to you so that you don't have to get up because these house lights are about to go down. It's going to get very dark. I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Pamela Blackmon. Pamela is involved in so many artistic and cultural endeavors throughout the city that it would be impossible to name them all. So I'm just going to name two. And that is that she's the programs manager for the Press Hall Foundation. And she is the co-founder of the Crew of King James Super Bad Sex Machine Strollers that marches in Crew M. All right. Bring it out the way.
Thank you, Megan. Welcome, everybody. I'm so excited to be here because I love playing. I love playing with people. I love playing in these wonderful places. And we have on stage some of the greatest players in the world. We have musicians, authors, and somehow we've all been selected to talk about the places that we play. And I know that you all have played in some of these places. Maybe some of you have not played in these places. But what we're here to do is paint a picture and a story of what was, what's here, and what's to come. So I really just want to get into the amazing people that make this happen, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves because I don't want to butcher anybody's names. But when you introduce yourself, I'd love for you to have a brief connection to these places, just for the people to kind of get their imaginations going. Let's start with Miss Donna Sims.
Hi, I'm glad to be here, and my name is Donna Poniatowski Sims, and my husband and I had a place on Rampart in St. Anne where we played the New Orleans musicians. The only other musicians we played were musicians who actually came down here and learned New Orleans music. So the traditions of New Orleans and the culture of New Orleans has always been a big part of my life. So I wrote about it. All of the brass bands and all the other musicians.
Hi, I'm Craig Klein. I play trombone, and I have had the pleasure of playing in Donna's many times, many late nights, and also the pleasure of playing in Preservation Hall every, at least once or twice a week now. So the relation between both of those clubs has been a very near and dear experience for me.
I'm Eve Abrams, and I've had many pleasurable nights in Donna's. I miss it dearly. I'm not a musician, although I am married to a musician and I live with a lot of instruments, but I am a professional microphone holder, and I had the great pleasure of putting a microphone in front of a lot of musicians who play at Preservation Hall over a dozen years ago. And Benji Jaffe said, like, you have a really hard job because musicians express themselves through their music. And I was asking them to express themselves through their words. So I guess I am a professional coaxer-outer.
My name is Gladney. I am a multi-instrumentalist, and I had the privilege of growing up in these bars. In high school, I played in Donna's a few times, and I don't remember the first time I played at Preservation Hall, but my playing there was more so when I was more of a professional at that point. So, yeah, I grew up in these bars.
So wonderful. Not only do we have Grammy-nominated and Grammy-winning musicians, but then the people who have learned to take their words with the music and their experiences and put it into print form so that it lives on forever. So I love it because we get to hear how these stories are told through different mediums and words and photographs and live music. And really, this is two different stories. We were talking about Donna's, who is not presently open, and Preservation Hall that is, but how integral the first, which was Donna's, came and what it birthed and how that relates to Preservation Hall, which is still here. So we have elegy and continuity in our conversation, which I think is very important when we talk about New Orleans musicians and tradition and culture, because at the end of the day, all of this plays into the role of passing the torch. And that's not only a responsibility for the people who are creating the music, who are documenting the music and the culture, but for us, the people who go play in those spaces and how we participate and how we pass it on as well. So really the story that we're telling is how these places hold memories and meaning. So by a show of hands, I'm sure all of you have memories of either these people or these places, but has anyone here been able to see any music at Donna's when it was in its awesome? And has anyone been able to see anything at Preservation Hall? Great, and I see some hands that didn't go up at all, and that's amazing because we get to paint the picture for you, and I'm excited to hear the memories and the experience of Donna's, because when I'm at Preservation Hall, we have Donna's beautiful, I call it an encyclopedia because it is packed. We have Donna sitting in the back, and anytime there are musicians there, they're flipping through, and I'm telling you, they almost missed the set because they're just back there sharing the stories. So really, let's get into it. So we talked about your brief connection to the spaces, to Preservation Hall and Donna's, but what I'd like to know is how did you get there? Who brought you into these worlds? Donna, I know that there's a lot in your book, and I know that there's a lot that people can look up, but briefly, just like, how'd you end up in that space?
Well, that's an interesting question. I actually came back to New Orleans as soon as I graduated. I'm from here. And so when I came back and I met my future husband, we always went to Preservation Hall. We were here when Alan actually started it. And it was an art gallery at first. And so we got to know what was happening over there. We knew the bands that were playing over there at that time. And what Alan was trying to do was bring in the traditional jazz of New Orleans back. So I kind of started feeling that. I have to tell you, it's over a 50-year saga with me. So that's what's in the book. And speaking of Benji's the same age as my kids. He's smack dab in the middle with my daughter. And I can remember, I have a piece in there about Alan going to Japan with the jazz and coming back with comic books. And my oldest son said, "You're going to put that book on." I said, "Yeah, I will." But the point is, there's been a connection connection between Preservation Hall and Donna's for all these years. Basically because we both felt like the traditional music of New Orleans needed to be kept alive and feel that to this day. And so based on that, my first husband and I had a place at 711 Bourbon, and we played the traditional musicians, the Placide Adams and Bob French and all those people. And when I started Donna's with my second husband, my first husband passed, I started Donna's with my second husband, Charles Sims. And we just tried to continue that tradition. But the funny story is Bob French came in and he gave me a freebie to help me get started. And in the book I said, Bob would be turning over in his grave today if I told anybody that he gave me a freebie. But so there's always been that connection with the traditional music and the traditional musicians and me. And then I love the brass bands. And I noticed that no one was really playing the brass bands except Preservation Hall with the Olympia brass bands. Yeah. So I started trying to get the brass bands in. The rest is history. We were called Brass Band Headquarters. And Gladney was part of not the brass bands, but the young people that would come into Donna's. That's where we kind of differed, is that I was actually called an incubator because I played so many young musicians. Because they asked, and because the older musicians had such grace in helping them to learn this music. Let them play with the older musicians. And that's why they're so good to this day. Because if you have someone who's excellent, and you aspire to this excellence, and you play up to that bar, you're going to be good. And that's what happened at Donna's. So that's just a little background. That's a short take on it. And we did a lot of firsts up in Donna's with not only the traditional musicians and the brass bands coming in such a way there was so many of them in one spot. Everybody knew where to find the brass bands because a lot of them didn't have we didn't have cell phones back then. So they'd come and ask me, where can I find so-and-so to go overseas or for a wedding, and that's how we did it.
Nice.
And he started that in there with the brass band too, with Bill's number and things like that. So, what did you get?
Well, as I look at both of these books, Shannon's book and this book, the musicians in this book are the same musicians in this book, just about. Because the pictures you took, they're not of the real old musicians, not like the Willie Humphreys and the Louis Nelsons. It's Tuba Fats and Greg Staffords, and they're all the wonderful photos in there. Musicians are all in Donna's book, so it was interesting just now as I was looking at that, saying, no, look, it's the same people who either played at Pres Hall and hung out at Donna's or played at Donna's. So, yeah.
When I interviewed Charlie Gabriel for this project, he was at a gig with Shannon at Donna's. And we were talking, and at one point Shannon's like, Charlie, wrap it up.
Yeah, it was a magical place. Preservation Hall is a magical place, always has been. From the very first moment I ever walked in there in the 1970s, I just knew there was magic happening there. And at Donna's, the magic was there also. Many nights of magic went on in there. And it was a learning. I kind of relate, there was the dewdrop. If you study history of New Orleans, you know about the dewdrop. The dewdrop was the place where musicians went to, and it went after hours, and there was a black music club, and some the white musicians would go in there also. But it was another magical place from what we understand. We didn't experience it. But Donna's was sort of like our dewdrop of our era. So it was, you would show up after the gig, you would hang out, you would listen to the music. The music was amazing. And Pam, you had mentioned about passing it on. Preservation Hall is, I think a lot of what happens there is intentionally to pass on the music, especially the kids in the hall, and a lot of the young musicians come in and sit in. It's intentional. At Donna's, I'm not sure that was intentional. It was just sort of happened.
It was a little different in that people like Trombone Shorty, kids like Trombone Shorty and Teeterman, and John Baptiste reminded me that he came in there when he was 12, and they came in to listen and to absorb, and what they did is they started out in brass bands, but then they started tweaking that music to what they wanted to do. And I remember John and Trombone Shorty actually came up with Orleans Avenue while they were in my place, when they were in high school. So they went all the way, Trombone Shorty went all the way from being 8 to 9. We used to kid James and say, here's the stool for Trombone Shorty, because his trombone slide would hit the floor if he was just standing up. So there's a lot of stories in the book about all of that and how they came in there to, I think there was a huge transition at that time in the music. And that's what I wanted to convey, was that people were leaving this little piece of history out. And it was very historic. It's when the brass bands came inside and became a worldwide phenomenon because people knew where to find them. It was where the traditional musicians and people like Leroy Jones and Greg Stafford came in to play, and the kids were there listening to them play and finding out how to do this traditional music, as well as being in the streets with it. How to do actual club gigs and worldwide gigs and festivals and other places. So.
And there's one part that really stuck out to me at the beginning that I'll read to y'all real quick. And it says, you will read how brass band musicians and the black masking Indians entered Donna's Bar and Grill through the club's doors into a nurturing atmosphere that counted itself as a part of this community and, as such, lent itself to creative experimentation. I think that's what was kind of the main thought that came out into my mind when I was imagining what this place was. It says, they emerged as world-class musicians, effectively spreading the culture of New Orleans around the globe, while at the same time mentoring and influencing the next generation of young musicians. And I think that's key when we talk about the parallels between Donna's and Preservation Hall, because it's still happening. It was just a different environment. And I keep touching on this word that's in the theme of this panel, the places we play. And it seems like Donna's was definitely a place that people can play in the playful sense. And that still happens at Preservation Hall, but I think that it has evolved into a different type of playfulness where that intergenerational engagement that people like Gladney has developed as a young person working with the elders like Charlie Gabriel, where you can think back to the spaces where you kind of let your guard down, and then you enter a space that has this reference to it, but you have the comfort because you have nurtured this relationship with the elders like Charlie Gabriel. So one definitely lent itself to the other with the comfortableness. How do you feel about that? You reflect back onto how you entered to Donna's and then the experiences that you had in Preservation Hall, which is a little bit more buttoned up.
Yeah, so I can't remember when I met Delphia Marcellus. I know it was when I was in middle school, but meeting Delphia led to me being in these places. It led to me being at Donna's in high school. It led to me playing at Snug Harbor, sitting in with his father, Ellis Marcellus, on Fridays. And also another important place, an important incubator was the Prime Example, which was another proving ground type of place where Jesse McBride and the next generation would be every Wednesday playing the music of modern, contemporary jazz musicians from New Orleans, such as James Black and Harold Batiste, Alpha Batiste. And that experience of playing in the clubs, playing with these musicians led to me finally being called for Preservation Hall, which was for was it the 50th, 70th, which
60th
60th,
anniversary?
yeah. The 60th anniversary was my first opportunity to play properly with the band for a gig. This was at the Orpheum.
So many years later from when you first stepped foot into Dallas and went to these other places.
Right, and for me, it felt like I had truly made it in New Orleans, because I see that band as like a covenant place, a sacred ground of sorts, and to have done enough work to be invited there was a hallmark achievement for me, and it all started playing in the jazz camps, and it all started playing in jazz camps and in these clubs. And I don't know anywhere else in the world where it's okay for kids to be in bars playing this old music. You know, I didn't drink, so didn't have to worry about that. And my mother trusted Delphio, so we didn't have any problems.
So I wanted to pass it on to Eve, because we're talking about the energy of the room and being some of the people to help move that energy, and we can get into like the acoustics and the sound and how that played into your experience itself. But for someone who plays with your camera, plays with your words, what's it like to not only be in that experience and be connected to the energy and the spirit of the room? How do you capture that? How do you capture that in words, photo? And when you all pick up your copies of these books, you will see that these photos are phenomenal. The photos really do capture something in your mind that is not in the words. But then what I love is that you both are able to put these beautiful words and memories together with the photos. But when you're in that moment as an artist, especially in Preservation Hall, where it's a small space and you don't want to be intrusive, how do you get into your zone to be able to connect with the moment, but also capture what you're feeling in a way that the readers later on can tap into that moment?
Well, just to be clear, I'm not a photographer. I didn't take any of the gorgeous photographs in this book. Shannon Brinkman did, yeah. And what was happening was Shannon was working on this book for quite some time, and I think her and Benji hatched the idea together to make the book, and Shannon realized this isn't embodying the musicians enough, we need their words, and she tried, I think she said she tried with John Bertius first because he was so kind. She tried to interview him, and it was, she said, a disaster. And so she talked to Benji, and he suggested bringing me in on the project, and I was thrilled because I had only recently moved to New Orleans. I'd just been here a few years at that point, and so for me, what was most exciting was, I mean, my favorite thing to this day about New Orleans is the way people talk here. I don't think this microphone is serving our talking very well, but I'm in love with listening to people talk, and it was such a privilege to be able to talk to these musicians. And there's some that I did interview in the hall. I interviewed Lucien Barberin in the hall. I interviewed Will Smith in the hall. Thaddeus Richard. I'm sure there are others, but so many. But a lot of them was, in their house. I went to Daniel Farrow's house. I went to Doc Watson's house. I went to Marie Watanabe's house. I went to Lars Edegren's house, or I went to Donna's to catch. It was all over. I was listening back to these stories that we made, and like, why is it so noisy with Mark Bro? Oh, because we interviewed him at a festival. So, there were just so many musicians. But I think what 201, they talk about the interplay between the musicians and the audience, so that what you're talking about, Pam, I think having them describe that the aliveness of all the interactions was key, but it was really, Shannon was more the documenter who was capturing that in those spaces. For me, I was just, the, for lack of a better word, the idiot asking questions. And I say that because I remember one of my first interviews, we started this project after Katrina, and Benji had a list of people to talk to ASAP because he was afraid for their health. And one of them was Walter Payton. I was so grateful that we got him. But one was, oh God, the gentleman's name just went out of my head. One was Doug Watson, and he also passed, but, oh, Ralph Johnson. And Ralph Johnson was saying things, and he could tell by the look on my face, I didn't know what he was talking about. And I'm not talking about music theory, it was more like the spiritual transcendence that he experienced with the audience. And I was doing my best to try to understand him, but we all knew that I didn't quite understand what he was talking about. And it took it took time for me to get, I mean, these things are really hard to put into words. So I should say, one of the things that we did, their words are transcribed in this book. There are a lot of quotes by the musicians, but we also had an exhibit at the Jazz Museum. I think it wasn't yet called the Jazz Museum, it was still the US Mint. And it was Shannon's photographs and a ton of, the collection of the hall. And then also I made these audio documentaries. I don't know why that sounded weird pronouncing it, but anyway, it's so great because you get to hear the musicians in their own words, and I think we might be hearing one a little bit later today, which is great, because again, it's like in the same way that a person's personality comes through their horn or their drums, or it comes through their voice, their cadence, their intonation, and to me, that was the closest I could get to capturing it's like the fingerprint of the person. It's like, how did I hear it recently described? Sound is like touch at a distance. Like it's so intimate, and yet you're not necessarily with them. So anyway, that was my task.
And yes, just to clarify, the Preservation Hall book, the photos are by Shannon Brinkman,
Right.
and then the words are by
Well, I'm sort of the translator.
Right.
The words are by the musicians.
Well,
I'm the intermediary, I guess.
Yeah. Pick it up and you'll see.
Yeah.
So when we talk about energy and spirit, we're definitely talking about people as well. But let's go back to the venues themselves, right? So it's kind of a general question, and then we'll point it back to Donna's in Preservation Hall. But in your minds, what makes a venue, quote unquote, legendary? Is it the space itself? Is it the moment in time? Is it the people? Is it all of the above? What is a legendary venue? Because before I started Preservation Hall, I was working with a lot of creative people in the industry, and one of the venues that I was privileged enough to help people with it's called Gasa Gasa. And so as I was reaching out to work with different creatives in the industry, someone that is now my mentor, her name is Melissa Weber, aka DJ Soul Sister. I was like, I want to work with her. So I emailed her and I described to her what is transpiring with Gasa Gasa. And she replied back, and I was so thrilled, and she was like, the only reason why I messaged you back is because you described the energy of the room and the art. So I'm interested. And to this day, I hold that in my heart because it's not a lot of the other things that artists and the creatives want to stick with them. It's the energy and the artisticness of the room, but that's not necessarily in every room. But it might be something else that makes the space legendary. Is there something in your minds that makes a venue legendary, whether it's one that's here now or one that ain't dead no more?
That's a really good question. I think the energy of a space makes it legendary, and you can feel the energy immediately. Bam, you just feel the energy that there's something special about it, and I think that's what makes a place legendary. That's what I feel, you know, like when I first experienced Preservation Hall in about 1977, hanging out in the French Quarter with a fake ID, and walking past, they used to open the shutters behind the drum so people walking by could look in and see it, maybe entice them to come in. And I can remember walking by with my Hurricane and hearing the music coming through, and I was like, and I stood at that glass, and I let my friends, they went to Bourbon Street. There was good music on Bourbon Street in the 70s too. So that's when we would come down for the music. And I heard that, and I was drawn, it pulled me in. And that is, to me, that was my experience, just understanding this place is legendary. I didn't know the history of the place at that time. Not till later did I figure that out. And it was always, then if I had a couple dollars, I would go in the club and stand against that back wall and watch these elder musicians play this amazing music. And I always had a dream I want to play it one day, you know. And then Donna's, for some reason, I knew all the musicians who played there. We all went, if you go on, you knew all the musicians that played there, right? So when you go there, you're around your friends and your peers and your some elders and some youngsters, and the energy of that space was another thing that just hit you immediately. And that's to me, that's what seems to make it a space legendary.
I think on the surface, what the first answer is, what makes venues legendary? I would say it's the people who played it. And in the case of these venues, it's the role the venues played in the incubation process of the music, creating a space that allowed me to come in and meet the musicians that I would later know for years, learn the repertoire, learn etiquette on the stage, even though the stage is on the ground, you know. And I'll mention like the prime example as well, because these venues, while they housed a great amount of top tier talent, they also made space for all the people who weren't yet there yet. And they let modern age self be in there. But these are legendary because New Orleans music is legendary, and every venue that houses New Orleans music, no matter which part of the era, becomes the stuff of legend. It's kind of inevitable, I would say. There's one other point that I'm forgetting, but when I look back on the time I spent at Donna's, a lot of the memories I don't remember. I'm not too old, but it was just far enough away for it to kind of just become like a hodgepodge of just a feeling than just a explicit this, that, and the other. I do vividly remember showing Jesse McBride my iPod Classic, which was like the latest tech of the time. So this had to be like 2006, 2007. I could rap on, but.
And I did just want to mention, when we're talking about some of the people in these places, the first thing I saw when I opened up Donna's book was this index full of names of mostly bands. It's not even all the names of the people that are in the band. So I thought it was so incredible that there is even a way to touch on all of these people, and I'm sure it's not even all. I don't even know, it might be just the people that we were able to put in the book. But this is just, an example of how much talent is in New Orleans, how much talent we've lost, but has continued on. And we're talking a lot about Donna's, but Eve, I know that you were able to visit Preservation Hall for the first time in some years, and I wanted to pass it to you just to get your perspective on what has changed, what hasn't changed. What was that like visiting, just to kind of check in a couple weeks ago?
It was Craig was playing.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, I knew almost everybody on the bandstand, which was awesome, and except for the leader, who I didn't know, who was young. And
Really?
Oh, really?
that was awesome.
There's Sunshine Bar.
Yeah, I mean, the feeling was the same. I missed the sign that said, requests $2, traditional 5, saints 10. I missed that sign. But yeah, the vibe was exactly the same. It was a house of joy. I mean, my cheeks hurt afterwards. Really.
How's it stayed the same?
I mean, I think it's always been packed, and people are always just so excited to be there, and there's, it's not just the music, it's entertaining. You know, I think it's like there's so much engagement with the audience, and it just feels so quintessentially New Orleans. I don't know, when you said, like, of course it's inevitable that it's gonna have this because it's this like house of New Orleans musicians. I mean, that's how it feels. It's like, it's the house, it's the home. Like, it's just, magic is gonna happen there. I don't know, I'm sorry, I'm not being very articulate about it, but I mean, the benches are new. I know Bill Murray made new benches, but they look old. They're the old style. Like, it's, the spirit is there.
Right.
The spirit is there. And the musicians bring the spirit.
Exactly.
The air conditioning is new.
New, but it depends on if you feel the cracks in the floor. You know, it's as air conditioned as it can be for New Orleans.
There was a bar. I couldn't believe there was a bar, actually.
Yeah.
Because I remember Benji saying that it was really important to his dad, like, there's no music here. Because it's like a differentiation from the other places on Bourbon Street. But I think it's smart that they have a bar. But I was just a little, okay.
So I know that a few of you work with younger generations, not necessarily in these spaces. I know, Craig, you do get to work with some of the younger generations. And I don't know if in your conversations with them you speak to them about the past or the present venues, but how is it that you can, or how do you get them to connect with some of these places that were so influential in the development of these current musical legends? How is it that you can get them to connect to the past as it relates to their present and their future? Because I know that some of the times when I'm talking to the younger kids, their eyes glaze over and it's like ready to get on their iPhone. But I think that you all have a gift of being able to connect with them. So if they had not been to any of these venues or maybe aren't interested in playing in some of these venues, I'm specifically thinking about the classroom setting. If you're in a classroom setting, how do you inspire joy? How do you inspire them to reach back and gain appreciation for places that were so crucial to your artistic ability? And you're an educator too as well, so can you speak on it?
Well, I don't know. In Donna's, I will tell you that we used to have universities and high schools come into the place because they wanted to learn. And what we generally did is, my husband, Charlie, was a chef, as you well know. So he would cook dinner for them. And then I would give about a 40-minute little lesson from Buddy Bolden all the way up to what we were doing then in Donna's. And then somebody would play. Most often it was Tremay Brass Band, or Leroy Jones, or Wendell Brunius, or some of those other people. And when you were talking about the spirit of the plays, the spirit of the plays is the musicians, and the fact that the musicians feel comfortable in that place. I can remember speaking of Wendell Brunius, Freddie Alonso would be playing elsewhere, and he would just come in, and I'd see him flip up in his trombone case, and the next thing he was up there playing with Wendell Brunius. It was those kinds of sets that made Donna's and Preservation Hall what they are. And I have a concern today, because Preservation Hall is one of the ones that's left insofar as actually being run by Benji and that group of people. Donna's was a mom and pop operation. Dewdrop was the same way. Nightcap with Alfred Doucette. All these places are gone. And on Frenchman Street is rapidly turning corporate. And it's just, one of the reasons I wrote the book is I could see the handwriting on the wall. And I wanted people to understand that there were places that had this type of spirit where people could come in and sit in with each other and just lay down and play off of each other. And the audience was the benefactor. And that's what I think the whole spirit was about, just those things. And teaching the young ones in those kind of situations. That's why the universities and the high schoolers came to us. And do so with Preservation Hall.
So I'm in my 4th year of teaching at the New Orleans Center for Creative Arts. And this is the high school that I attended. And back in my day, for a 3-year window, there was a middle school named Noka Academy. And I entered Noka Academy in 7th grade. 8th grade year was Katrina for me. But in that 1 year, I studied under Clyde Kerr Jr. and Jonathan Bloom. And in that 1 year, Clyde Kerr gave me the foundation for, like a solid foundation for the music. And I don't know how he did it in that 1 year. In the summers, I would work with Alvin Baptiste and Kid Jordan and Clyde, Herman LeBeau, Alvin Fielder at Satchmo Jazz Camp. And when I got to Noka, as we would call it, Noka Riverfront, the high school, my 7th grade year was Alvin Baptiste's last year of teaching, as he passed on the day he was to play at Jazz Fest in 2007. Clyde Kerr Jr. would follow him not long after that. And I sit at a crucial intersection between legends of old passing and a new crop of students who will never know them. And what they left with me is what I pass on to my kids. That's the repertoire and the spirit that these musicians viewed and exemplified, because they were all working musicians. So they're telling us what happens on the bandstand. They're telling us tales of the road in, raw detail. And in this day and age, it is harder to corral kids who grow up with 30-second reels as their entertainment. Now, what I noticed different from my time at Noka now is that there are always going to be students who are there just because, but there are also always going to be students who are serious about the music and are going to decide that they're going to learn it whether you're there for them or not. And so I've had the opportunity to have some of my students play in my band, which was the opportunity that was given to me. And also every Saturday I play at the Dewdrop. When we do a Legends of the Dewdrop series where we detail the story of how rock and roll was formed at the Dewdrop. And I have students who come every Saturday to come listen to the music, learn the repertoire, and sit in at the end of the song. So for me, it's about keeping up the traditions that supported me and aided me in my development. You can't make anybody want to know the music, but you sure can nurture the ones who do.
I think that's the way. That's really the way to do it, because you have to get the young musicians to come out to the club. So they go into the Dewdrop and really experience a club to play with some real musicians, I mean, how do you tell a high school kid, yeah, you should be hanging out on Frenchman Street, get a fake ID and come hang out. You really can't do that these days, Maybe in the old days you could, but So it's more of a challenge to get kids to come out. I mean, it's hard to get the kids to come hang at Preservation Hall because, first of all, you have to think about, are they going to be a cover? Are they going to get in? I mean, we know some of the musicians that come in.
Or is it a school night?
Or is it a school night? Right, you know, so and there aren't places like Donna's. There's a few places, you have to search them out. Sweet Lorraine sometimes has music when there's certain things going on, but how do we get the high school kids and if it's a college kid, it's easier, you know. But I notice a lot of them, especially a lot of the college, I don't see them. I don't see too many youngsters anymore. We used to see Caleb was a young trombone player, and Caleb started coming to Preservation Hall when he was about 13 or 14 years old, and he loved it. He would put his suit on and come to the hall. But his father brought him.
He was a truck driver. He would drive all night.
All night, and then take his son to Preservation Hall. And now Caleb is living in Spain playing, or Morocco maybe, playing music. So I think it's a bit more of a challenge on getting youngsters coming out. Gladly, you're in a situation where you're more exposed to them, you know. What we do at Preservation Hall with the kids in the hall, it's hard to because most of them are youngsters. How do we entice them? Well, you should be coming out more often. It's a so.
How are you doing on time?
Is 5:15.
Well, I was going to say, so we kind of touched on it already, but without the physical space, you know, how does the tradition stay alive? Where does it live now? That's kind of what we just touched on. And if you all do your homework, there's a wonderful SoundCloud that Eve has that has several different topics, and it's from the musicians' voices themselves, speaking on all kinds of topics, but there's several points in all of them where they touch back to the point of playing in the streets. Now, of course, even playing in the streets is different than what it used to be, where, you know, there used to be a brass band on every corner. There are all these different opportunities. I think that gentrification has kind of made that harder, where the neighborhoods themselves are not the same. A lot of people were able to be in a neighborhood with people they knew, where they could go to a family member's porch, and it was just around them. Even the schools now are different, where a lot of kids are going to schools that they don't necessarily see their neighbors, so it's a little bit tougher. But one through line that I noticed when they were talking about the music in the streets, it kind of pointed back to the funeral traditions and dirges and second lines. And there was a really great moment where Carrie Fatman Hunter, who is no longer with us, but Carrie mentioned that, you know, until you play a funeral, until you play in the streets and you see how the music is feeling the people. As you're walking down the street, you see this lady in a wheelchair and the music starts moving her and she starts waving her little handkerchief. Or you see a baby and the baby has no clue what's going on, but then the baby starts bebopping, and so playing music in a space where you can see how the people react. I think that's really important, but without physical space, aside from just passing along the words and maybe printing these words and sharing them, are there any other thoughts on how you feel like this tradition can stay alive physically without the spaces?
I think this tradition will stay alive strictly from the streets, because that's the purpose of a brass band in the first place. That's why you have a sousaphone instead of a bass and all that kind of stuff. Thank you, Mr. Pepper, who invented that. Makes it a little louder. But anyway, my thing is, I go to all the social and pleasure clubs, second lines just about to this day. I'm out there. And I see these young kids, and when I say young kids, I mean little people with their parents. And second lines are kind of getting a bad rap these days. And they shouldn't, because by and large, it's kind of a family affair with the musicians out there, with their little kids playing with them, learning how to walk in those streets and how to react to people who are getting close to them and all this kind of stuff. And not only that, but we have something here that's kind of unique in the U.S., not unique elsewhere in the Caribbean or Africa. But we have All Saints Day, which is the day, our Day of the Dead. And we celebrate that. And the way we celebrate that is through our brass bands. So the brass bands are constantly on the street with our traditions, and my book attends to that. In fact, Fat Man's, I have a big picture of people, what you do is they call it toasting the casket, when they're putting it up in the air, and how his casket had,
Oh, beautiful.
it was gorgeous, and so many people who were there, and this is the only city I know of that you can get 2,000 to 3,000 people out in the street running along with a band, and everybody's happy. I see it all the time. I'm there. So I don't want to hear stuff about, oh, these second line. No, I'm there almost every Sunday. So yeah, it's going to stay alive in the streets.
And I will say something that I noticed specifically, and I think it kind of prompted a conversation with me, Craig, and some other musicians. What astounded me at Fat Man's second line was not only how many people in general were there, but I have never seen so many young ones there. And not only there just because they wanted to be there, and they wanted to play. But what we walked away with, I think it was maybe even the next day we were all together just kind of talking about it, was the fact that not very many, any of them, knew how to play a funeral dirge. They could not play I'll Fly Away. And so that, I think, speaks to something that is a community effort, a community thing that we have to approach. There are so many different programs and things that contribute to the kids learning outside of the school, but the schools are just not able to do what they used to do. And I think that if we can all, as a person who goes and plays with the players in these places, it's up to us to make sure that these alternative resources, these alternative programs are able to give the kids what they want. They may not say it, but when we're out in these spaces, it shows up. And I think that, us being the champions of that going on, along with, the documenting of the past and present, I think it all goes hand in hand. But, I want to point back to Eve. What ways of documenting do you think mattered the most when we're passing down? Is it oral tradition? Is it a combination of it all? What do you think has been?
I think it's all important.
Mm-hmm.
I was in this great, I think it was called the Museum of Sound in Vienna a couple of years ago. And you could put on headphones and listen to sound in a bunch of different ways. And one of them was sound through a mother, like if you're a baby in utero. And that just made me think of New Orleans. You talk about the second lens, but like how many kids are hearing this music before they're born? What does that do to your brain? I think all the means of documentation are wonderful. And records. That's documentation. Yeah, and we're lucky we still have a music press, or we again have a music press, a record press here in New Orleans. But all of it, at the hall they're very generous, like at the end of the show. All these people came up and took pictures, right? Got signatures, and I don't know. I can't preference one over another, but I think there's no substitute for being there, either at the club or on the street. Your mom's tummy.
Back to the previous point about passing on, I think it's important to note that there are more and more programs for kids at young ages to learn the music. There's the Ellis Marcellus Center now, there's Trombone Shorty Academy, Roots of Music, and the Jazz and Heritage Center have programs. So, whereas when I was growing up, it was just jazz camp. Now there are programs after school and in the summers, throughout the year that kids can go to.
And actually, can I add one more point to that? There are musician after musician talks about their band teacher when they tell the story of what they play. I mean, Clyker Jr., Senior.
And my first teacher was my first band teacher was Alonzo Bowens, who used to play with, I believe, Dr. John and everybody. So me as a saxophonist, I was under one of the premier saxophonists in the city. And he prepared me for Nota and so on and so forth.
You know, when you talk about the traditions and you talk about the programs that are happening now, I'm reading a book right now, Louis Armstrong's Satchmo, His Early Life in New Orleans. It's like the second or third time that I've read it. It's a great book. It talks about his upbringing in New Orleans as a small child. And when he got his cornet, when he went to the Colored Waifs home, and he came out at 14 years old, and we're talking 1914 to 1915, he started following the Onward Brass Band and following King Oliver. So this was a program that he was in. And when Donna said in the second lines, we see these kids still doing the same thing that's been going on for 120 years, it's still happening. And the tradition is, it's not gonna die. You know, musicians will come up through it and they'll learn it, and it'll always happen, because when you look at these kids, they're into it. They want it big time. And remember Troy, right? Troy was this big, and his mom would hold trombone short. His mom would hold, the trombone was bigger than him, and his mom would push him out into the front of the band. I can remember seeing him. And there would be she had a trumpet mouthpiece taped into the trombone because it was easier for him to blow it. And she would push him out in the front and give him the horn, and he would blow, 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 and he'd get tired, and he'd give the horn back to her, and he would dance around. And this is something that's happening. When you think back, Louis Armstrong, even before that, Buddy Bolden and those guys, this happened, and it's, you know, it's a culture of New Orleans. It's a black New Orleans music culture. You know, this is real culture here. That's, when you think about that, and that's 150 years, maybe more. Or if you go back to Congress Square, we're talking 300 years here in New Orleans of music culture. And being a white guy who stumbled across this music and I was like, wow. When I first came across the Sixth Ward, the Treme, this great black neighborhood in 1980, and there was clubs all over, I didn't want to go back to my white neighborhood. My white neighborhood wasn't hip anymore, you know? So the music was just part of the scene, always, and it always has been. It always will. It's a lot different now than what it was, but I still think the opportunities for young musicians are going to present itself.
I would like to say one thing, though. Traditionally, these kids were being taught from elementary through middle through high school in bands, literally, in the New Orleans public school system. As we all well know, there's no more New Orleans public school system. And as a result, you don't have this kind of exposure anymore for these children. And that's why people have stepped up to the plate, like Roots of Music and Trombone Shorty and all these other people, because I'm sad to say the legacy is that's going of having bands for young people in our schools. You might want to remember that sometime, about where that whole educational thing is going here in New Orleans. That's just me speaking as an educator. Mm-hmm. And knowing when I had Donna's, where they were coming from these different schools that were playing this stuff. And unfortunately, I don't have that opportunity too much anymore. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Mm-hmm. And I think, again, we just keep talking about the cultural fabric of New Orleans now and how it plays into, you know, the traditions and the programs that made it what it is. And I do want to keep emphasizing just the beauty of Words and Music Festival, because it is words and music that come together to produce the confidence and the inspiration and the spirit that make, you know, the stage presence come alive. Because, you know, you talk to a lot of musicians that didn't know how to read music. They learned it by ear, but they maybe took a program that helped their literacy, which then helped their confidence to be able to talk to a student. You know, I talk to some musicians, they're like, well, I'm not a teacher, but there are ways and programs that play into each other that then spark what's already within folks. So I think that when we are talking about bridging the past to the present and what we can do right now to elevate that is really paying attention to these community programs, these after-school programs. You know, it's not necessarily all the ones that are very prominent, but there are a lot that are developing. We have girls play trumpets too, and there's also just different culture bearers in the city who maybe haven't created the program yet, but when they talk to us, we can help be the incubators of those ideas and point them in the right direction. Because at the end of the day, every single person, no matter what the medium, you know, I don't have an instrument, I don't have any tools, I have a lot of ideas, and I love to connect people. And so all of it plays into what we as participants in this culture go and play into. So I don't know how much time we have left. Q&A? Okay, does anybody have any questions for us? I'm sure that we'll figure out a way to get the microphone to you, but I would love to hear from you all about memories and questions. I see one. Ms. Bailey?
I have a question.
You want to stand up just so?
Sure. As a person in the music industry, I've been in the music industry now for 12 years. And as someone who's moving away, what would be your advice or your words to someone to not only keep this culture and this vision of music and just like the way that people fantasize New Orleans and talk about New Orleans without actually knowing or understanding the true culture and the justification that goes into it? How would you be a person? What is your advice to give to someone who goes other places and wants to educate people on this and wants to give them some kind of glimpse into the magic here? Because you can't recreate what happens in New Orleans anywhere else, and I know that.
How do you pass it on when you're in another place?
Yeah.
You show them the records. They gotta hear it. Yeah. I don't, you know, whether it's you knowing a song and you showing them the song and then playing the record, then that's how it's supposed to go. But they've got to hear it. If we talk about the music, they gotta hear it. If we talk about food, they gotta taste it. So.
And I really do think that each SoundCloud is.
Well, do we want to?
I know, I don't think we have time or ability to
It's
play.
not. It's my website, evabrams.com, or you can go on SoundCloud.
But I'm telling you, in these 7 to 6 minute clips, it packs so much in simply just with the musicians speaking. But you can hear their accents, you can hear the excitement, you can hear them kind of like trying to remember themselves. But that hearing from the people themselves really does play a big role in it. And then, you know, you bring it all together, you have the music, and then you have some visuals. We do have some great documentaries that can play into it. And then you tell them to buy a ticket.
Tell them where to go when they come.
I just wanted to say one thing because this is kind of funny. I was listening to a friend the other night. I was listening to Tom, and he started playing this song, "Don't Put No Weenies in My Gumbo."
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Because he said, you know, when they go places, people they want to say, "Oh, we're gonna feed you like you're like home."
No thanks.
And he said, "No, we really don't want to do that. But you can pass on how we really make gumbo."
45 minutes. 45 minutes of that.
Any other questions or sentiments or compliments, Ms. G? You want the microphone?
I was just wondering about, you know, you're talking about the schools and everything, but the class got brass.
Yes.
You know, that is such an amazing thing, and I didn't know that this many schools, I mean, you know, they all have marching bands, but is that something that has derived from just a regular band program?
That is actually put on by the Jazz and Heritage Foundation. I'm really excited because Preservation Hall Foundation will be partnering with them for this next round. And it is basically an all call to the band directors to participate. And so what they will do is they will enter to be selected in Gladney. I don't know if you're very much part of this, so I'm just trying to remember all the details, but they will submit songs. And what we're going to be doing this year is sending out musicians from Preservation Hall to have a 30-minute consultation with those band directors about the band's specific needs. Now, what's interesting is that those bands are not really practicing traditional New Orleans music. They're practicing the songs that they will be playing in parades, which are more modern. But we're going to go back to them later with a 90-minute session and teach them some of the traditions. And then in March, they go and compete. And once they win, and I think it's a couple bands that win, once they win, then they get a bunch of different resources. But I'm glad you mentioned that, because Class Got Brass is a wonderful way of keeping the traditions alive.
Yeah, that's a really good program also. There's so many. I was a judge for one of them. It was the one that's the one that the Jazz and Heritage Foundation puts on. And it was really fun to see all of these schools that have a brass band and really trying to do the traditional New Orleans thing. It was quite entertaining and it made me feel good to see high school kids getting into this brass band culture.
I think we have one more, and I saw some eyes that said I think we have to end soon, but I see one over here.
Hey, good evening. So I'm thinking about places like the Dewdrop that's getting new life breathed into it, right? And people who are doing that, like creating new iterations of old places or carrying on the tradition of creating these spaces for musicians to play. What are some lessons that y'all have learned about things that's important for people who are organizing these spaces to know, to really keep it to the spirit and not get sucked into the corporate, not get, like playing to a new audience that is based on something that's separated from the group? Like what advice would you give to the organizers of these venues that are trying to carry on this tradition?
That's a great question, because it is to lose sight of what makes it authentic, because you're trying to tend to the space more than to what the actual mission is.
I would say you have an advisory board of musicians and culture bearers, right? So put the power where you want power and the ideas. And then also you can involve the community, I would say, in what, if the establishment is meant to be a community space, well, how can it be more functional? I think that's something that I was really amazed by when I started learning about New Orleans music, how functional it is. Carl LeBlanc talked about that a lot, actually, like how in Africa there are words for all these different kinds of music that go with different parts of the day and different functions. So like, how could this space be part of what, the way that people live their lives in the city?
I don't have any experience running a venue, and I don't deal with numbers and all of that fundraising, but I think clearly defined values and definition of what the role of that space is to be. Is it just a venue for parties? Is it for cultural engagement? Who has access to it? Is it accessible? How do we prioritize humanity over, while also making a profit so that we can continue the work, but values matter a lot.
I think that's it. I think that's it for the time. That's definitely not it for the conversation, because we are all accessible. We are all very open to this conversation, because it is an ever-living thing. Because as New Orleans changes and as places ain't there no more, it's up to us to keep having these conversations so it can live beyond the spaces and the places that we play. So I just want to have y'all give another round of applause for all of the and thank you to